Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start today by expressing my solidarity with the people of Hong Kong. Over the past year, they have been an inspiration to people the world over as they stood up in the face of oppression, demanding their basic rights for the freedom of speech, assembly, for the right to vote, rights that were promised to them under the Sino-British Declaration and their basic law. Unfortunately, as we witnessed last week, Beijing has betrayed its promises to the people of Hong Kong, and today it is clear and obvious to one and all that Hong Kong is no longer autonomous. Indeed, as we confront our own yet unfulfilled dreams of equality and justice and reflect on our own struggles here at home to form our own more perfect union, one line in particular from the Hong Kong report just submitted by the State Department stood out to me. It said, quote, "The people of Hong Kong turned out in the millions to protest these violations of their human rights and fundamental freedoms. Instead of listening to their grievances and finding a democratic solution, the Hong Kong government deployed tear gas and made mass arrests, including of peaceful demonstrators." Close quotes. These are standards that we must hold Beijing and Hong Kong to, Mr. Chairman. But in order for that judgment to stand, we must hold ourselves to the values of our own highest aspirations as well. Sadly, it's not just Beijing that betrayed Hong Kong, but in my view, President Trump as well. All last summer, as the people of Hong Kong marched at times with American flags, the president was silent. When we considered the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, which I was proud to sponsor, the president said he was against it. And when we passed it, the president said he stood not with the people of Hong Kong, but with President Xi. He said he stood with President Xi. So it's no surprise to me that Beijing would think it had a green light in Hong Kong. But now it's incumbent on us to make sure that Beijing pays a price for its actions. It's critical not just for the people of Hong Kong, but for our larger policy with China. Our response must be swift and clear and targeted at Beijing, not the people of Hong Kong to whom we owe a deep moral debt. Unfortunately, President Trump has still not made clear exactly what he will do to make Beijing pay a price. And most of the measures he discussed in his press conference last week will affect Hong Kongers far more than Beijing. It's inevitable that Hong Kong will suffer in the years ahead. If Hong Kong is no longer autonomous, we simply cannot extend to it the benefits as a separate trade and customs territory that it has previously received, and which Beijing has taken advantage of for its own ends. But in the final analysis, Beijing, not Hong Kong, must be held to account for the bad behavior that has led us to where we are today. To that end, as the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I'd like to work with the chairman and the ranking member of the Banking Committee to develop a tight and targeted exactly what he will do to make Beijing pay a price. And most of the measures he discussed in his press conference last week will affect Hong Kongers far more than Beijing. It's inevitable that Hong Kong will suffer in the years ahead. If Hong Kong is no longer autonomous, we simply cannot extend to it the benefits as more like the treatment of mainland China without the burden falling disproportionately on everyday citizens of Hong Kong.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate the question, and it's a great one. I think what the administration should be focused on is selecting which measures it's going to adjust, which core bilateral relationships we currently have with Hong Kong that are now up for question, given the certification of non-autonomy, that it should adjust. This is similar to the conversation that Senator Brown and Mr. Harrell and I were having. Things like the extradition treaty may be up for consideration. Export control differentials should be considered. From a U.S. sanctions perspective, so in particular what this body can do, I think that your language and your approach of having a targeted approach to this makes a lot of sense. We have to sort of carefully balance both the need to put pressure on Beijing while at the same time making sure that we don't exact too much economic pain on Hong Kong in a way that drives U.S. and non-U.S. businesses out of the jurisdiction and makes Hong Kong lose its luster more quickly.
I agree with Mr. Lorber on the need to take a calibrated approach to reviewing the individual areas of U.S. law. And I very much agree with you, Senator, on the need to hold Beijing and not the people of Hong Kong to account. As you and your fellow members of this committee and the Foreign Relations Committee, Senator, look at targeted sanctions, I would urge you to think not only about individuals and financial institutions, where I know you and your staff are already thinking, but also very directly and aggressively against the kinds of Chinese companies that may directly facilitate surveillance and repression in Hong Kong, whether companies providing digital surveillance in Hong Kong or online surveillance in Hong Kong, or who might help build up the same kind of censorship apparatus in Hong Kong that exists in mainland China. And I would be thinking carefully and in a calibrated way about the tech sector as well as the financial sector here.
I appreciate it. I know my time is up, Mr. Chairman. I have other questions for the record, which I'll submit. Felt compelled to make a statement because I think this is a critical moment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.